Angela's story in Silent Hill 2 Remake is easily one of the most devastating and tragic stories in all of video games. In this video, I'll be giving my personal analysis of Angela's psychological state as it unfolds scene by scene, meaning this is all my opinion based on my academic and professional background in psych as a therapist. If you're wondering the specifics, check out the description down below. Before we start, I just wanted to say that we will be discussing various sensitive topics like sexual abuse, self-harm, and suicidal ideation. I will also be spoiling the story for Silent Hill 2 Remake, so if you haven't given the game a try, I highly recommend completing it and then coming back to this video. Now, let's dive into the psychology of Angela from Silent Hill 2 Remake. Our introduction to Angela tells us all we need to know. Knowing what happens with this story, the way she reacts to James's touch is most likely a trauma response. She goes through this fight, flight, or freeze response because of this, which is a bit exaggerated by the way she jumps up and gets startled, but it's pretty valid considering she's alone in a cemetery. Based on the way that she apologizes right after, and you'll see her do it over and over and over again, she shows this fear or anxiety of doing something wrong. We also see this physically manifest in her behavior when she's fidgeting with her fingers. Fidgeting is a common tell when somebody's feeling an uncomfortable emotion, like anxiety. But what is Angela worried about? She mentions afterwards that it's hard to explain the dangers of the town, so she could be anxious about how she's going to express it, but maybe her worry is rooted in what she knows. Also, the anxiety and/or fear could be about coming across a certain way, like if she's going to be judged by James. Maybe it's because he's an adult male, or could it simply just be about wanting to find her family? We also see her mood shift from what presents as anxious and withdrawn to what presents as angry and confrontational when she tells James that she's not lying. I feel like this response, albeit aggressive, is still rooted in anxiety because she wants to prove that she's good, or that she hasn't done anything wrong. This also hints that honesty was a big deal in her family, and there were probably grave consequences for lying. We also see her correcting herself from saying mama to mother. She could be feeling anxious about the way that James perceives her, whether it's to look more mature or to be respectful to an adult. Her talking about finding her family could allude to the town's effects of repressing her memory because she ended up killing her father and brother, and I even think her mother too. We saw how the town repressed James's memory throughout this story, so maybe it's doing the same here. A nice little detail too that I don't think is a coincidence is that she's looking for her parents in a cemetery and actively checking gravestones, hinting at their demise. In the next scene, Angela shows a total shift from her mood and behavior. She seems to be contemplating either self-harm or suicide with the knife that she's holding. Her being in front of a mirror symbolizes confronting herself. The thing is, though, she doesn't value herself and thinks she's worthless. There's more indication of this later on, but it's hinted at in this scene when she's contemplating suicide, doesn't accept help because she thinks she's just a burden, and she believes death or this nothingness is what she deserves. She also mentions that it's easier to run, which seems to be her go-to coping mechanism when dealing with uncomfortable situations or emotions. Running away from a dangerous situation is obviously okay, but I think it goes deeper here where she's been running away from her feelings and not confronting her past. The past being both her trauma from the abuse she's faced and murdering her family. Throughout this scene, we also see her mood shift from this depressive, hopeless mood to one where she's anxious, fearful, and even a little bit aggressive. I think when she smirks at James and asks if he's afraid, it could be cynical in the sense that she's trying to get a rise out of him, but I think another perspective could be that it's a genuine smile, that she's finding comfort in somebody else being afraid. We see her mood shift towards a frantic and borderline aggressive manner when James mentions knowing that her mom lived in the town. And I think she might be worried that he's going to hurt her or do something along those lines. She also gets up and goes into this fight, flight, or freeze mode again when James mentions Mary dying 3 years ago. She immediately wants to find her mom, which leads me to believe that James mentioning death reminded her about her family. She's also looking around and moving pretty frantically, showing that her mind is racing and she doesn't know what to do next. Before handing James a knife, she quickly glances at it with what seems to be this ominous and suspicious look. There's also blood on the knife, and there's no indication, unless I missed it, let me know if I did, that it's her blood, probably hinting that this is the murder weapon for either just her father or her whole family. Either way, she questions what she might do if she keeps the knife. This could be either A, hurting somebody else, or B, hurting or killing herself. You can tell that she doesn't have a grip on controlling her impulses, where If her emotions are at a high intensity, she just avoids them to stop feeling them. Usually it's to run, but if she's so sad, she might harm herself to avoid feeling that intense sadness anymore, which is a hint for later. We then see her get into that fight response, which I think is more of a trauma response from James approaching her the way he did. Her mentioning that she's been bad is indicative of how her father probably labeled her actions or behaviors, or maybe even her as a person overall. We see her apologize again, which, like I said, is a trend, but I think she's pleading not to be given negative consequences. Positive reinforcement was probably the last thing her parents would give her. It was probably all negative to try to correct her behaviors. The scene then ends with Angela avoiding these feelings the best way she knows how, by running away. The scene following Angela's first real display of emotional instability starts off with her being calm and fixated on a statue while expressing some disappointment about change. It seems like change is something that she's trying to avoid, and she wants things to remain the same, probably hinting that there was a point in time where she was happy, before everything went to shit. Shit being the abuse from her father mainly, but also her brother and mother. She also seems to come to this realization that her mom isn't in the town anymore. I don't know if this is her diving deeper into her psyche, if she's just having pessimistic thoughts, or if she was proven that she's not in the town. We also see her use mama without correcting herself, which could hint to her trusting James a little bit more as she doesn't really care what he thinks, or maybe she's being pulled into this psychological state from the past and she's accepting it, essentially accepting the past itself and her past self. Angela thinking that her mom doesn't want to see her could imply a few things. One could be that her mother either witnessed Angela killing the family or she witnessed the aftermath and completely disapproved of Angela killing them. Or it could also simply be that Angela killed her mom. With the happy to see me part, I like to have a little bit of optimism, where I think she believes that James has this genuine interest for her, and is surprised because she views herself as worthless and as nothing. The more not so fun perspective could be that her father would say that, so it's a trigger for her. When James clarifies that he's happy to see her alive, things get a little awkward and she presents some anxious or awkward signs like looking around, taking a while to speak, and deciding it's time to go. She rejects James's help again, either hinting at this fear of men or not wanting to be a burden, or maybe both. The most important part of this scene is when James calls her a little girl. More importantly, her response. The way she's shaking her head in disbelief, pleading, crying, saying no, that for sure was a trigger reminding her about her trauma. Specifically, I think that's what her father would call her. She goes into a total freeze, fight, flight mode. Freezing by shaking her head in disbelief and all that. Fight because she exclaims to James not to touch her and backs away. And then flight as she runs away. Before she does run away though, it seems like when she looks away from James, she might be seeing the manifestation of her father either as abstract daddy or maybe how she remembers him. But Silent Hill also likes to play tricks. I think maybe she's picturing James as her brother too. Ultimately, this scene is showing her getting closer and closer to the center of her psyche, unraveling all the trauma she's experienced. In the next scene, we get a glimpse into how Angela's traumatic events from the past would play out, specifically being abused by her father. The way that she's behaving in this scene, from the facial expressions, backing away, pleading, having difficulty breathing, all of this shows that she's in a state of highly intense fear. While I do think that she is talking to James, I feel like this could be a situation where she might be reliving her trauma, and she thinks she's actually talking to her brother instead. At the end of the scene, we end up seeing what her father looks like, at least the manifestation cooked up by Silent Hill that's specifically from James's perspective. But it could be how Angela sees him too. It looks like two humanoid bodies, one on top of the other in this perverted way. This is 100% symbolizing the sexual abuse, where one humanoid is the abuser dominating the other, the victim. James takes on the manifestation and we get a boss fight. During the boss fight between James and Abstract Daddy, we uncover a few things. First, we see Angela running through the hallways, probably reliving traumatic events where she'd run around her house and hide to avoid the abuse. It feels like she might be running away from us though, which leads me to believe that she might be in this state of delusion from Silent Hill where she even sees James as her father or possibly even her brother. She ends up running into a small closet, which I'm sure is where she would try to hide away from experiencing the abuse. There's also a stuffed animal she probably hugged for comfort, and you could hear a cry when you enter the closet, meaning she would probably hide and cry in there. Next, we got 2 recordings. The first one seems like her and her father were having a conversation, and he gets really angry at her for not looking at him, to the point where he's screaming. This shows him being verbally abusive while also being controlling. I wouldn't doubt that he physically made Angela look at him by grabbing her face or something like that. In the next recording, he's 100% gaslighting Angela into thinking that there's nowhere to go. It's this manipulative way of him being the abuser while also the savior at the same time, creating this loop where she thinks she's stuck. He also tells her that no one cares and that he knows what's best for her, which shows why she rejects help. She probably thinks that whenever James offers his help, it's transactional. There's something in return. That last sentence he says, at least to me, sounds like it could be, "I know what you want." Unfortunately, I think that there was some abuse right after him saying that. The boss arena also hints at the abuse she faced, as there's sexual imagery everywhere. The fleshy walls, the machinery showing what looks like pistons moving up and down to symbolize sex, it unfortunately makes it crystal clear that the abuse was sexual. Right after James defeats Abstract Daddy, Angela once again gives in to the impulses and begins to beat the living shit out of the manifestation of her father. She's experiencing this uncontrollable rage, which I think she also had when she killed her family. Next, we see her command James to not order her around. She's experiencing a power shift by killing her abuser, as now she's the one that gets to order people around. When she mentions "don't even try" to James, she's very skeptical of his intentions. Her perception of men is most likely skewed by her father and her brother, and she's probably generalizing all men as abusers that only want sex or at the very least want to manipulate and control women. She also accuses James of lying, which, if we go back to honesty being an important value to her family, she's basically confronting James the same way her father would to her. Next, we see her collapse to the floor and start crying because she gets flooded with emotions, and she's accepting having experienced these traumatic events and abuse. But I also think she realizes that killing her father wasn't enough, and that there's nothing she can do that can change the past. This scene also shows her resentment towards her father, which I think transcends to all men now, and I think she might be resenting herself a little bit, feeling guilty for putting up with the abuse for all those years and thinking that she's worthless or that she means nothing. It also shows just how much she buried that resentment and never really learned how to cope with it. What ends up happening is it's like putting a Mentos in a Coca-Cola bottle. You can put the cap on it, but it's still gonna explode at some point. Next, we see another mood shift. Now, I do think this could be a trick by Silent Hill on James, but let's say this is really Angela. After realizing she can't do anything to change the past and make herself feel better, her resentment now isn't just about her father, but all men, and James is right in the crosshairs. Her saying "your own little Mary" could be an indication of how she believes men view women as these toys they could play with and manipulate, specifically for sex because of her abuse. What's interesting is what comes next, where she gains this confidence to what seems like standing up for herself, even though she's sitting on the floor. She's having this intense eye contact with James, and her tone suggests that she's in control of the conversation and she has more power than him at the moment. We even see how confident she feels based on that chuckle she gives, even ordering James to admit, and doubles down by meeting him at his level. She also questions his fidelity to Mary, another generalization because her father clearly wasn't faithful to her mother. Her mood then shifts back to how she normally is, in this anxious and fearful state, calling her mother mama. As she walks away, I couldn't help but note her hitting the door on her way out. It could be a big nothing burger, but she had so much space to walk through. Why did she hit the door? Could it be like an impulse hinting at her disappointment that killing her father wasn't enough? Maybe she's disappointed in herself? We'll see how all of this accumulates in the next and final scene of Angela's story. We've got a lot to unpack in Angela's final scene, so strap in. First, let's talk about what the fire represents. To me, we're in her psyche. The other world represents the town's victim's psyche, one that is almost like their own personal hell. For James, everything is decaying and rotting because he was rotting with guilt, along with his wife rotting to death because she was sick. Angela's is a burning hell, representing the amounts of resentment and anger burning her alive. We also see 2 flayed men on each side of the staircase. This is supposed to represent her father and her brother. These are also physical manifestations of what I believe to be how intense her anger and resentment are because she wants revenge in the form of torture. I don't think she flayed them in the real world, but That's how angry she is about her experiences. When the scene starts, she's having this delusion thinking that James is her mom, and she's thrilled to find her as if she's finished her mission. The town is clearly playing tricks on her because it's not her mom, and she quickly gets disappointed. Seeing her mom would finally be the closure that she needs, as she mentions that she can finally rest. Rest being probably killing herself. It could also be that her mom is the last one left, meaning the last one left to kill. I'm still in the camp that she killed her mom because of a single piece of dialogue we're going to review right now. Her mom was verbally abusive at the very least, as Angela states that she, quote-unquote, deserved what happened. Now, what could that mean? It could be that she deserved the abuse, meaning that she had no comfort in her home and she was never safe. Her mom could have also been jealous of her in this sick and twisted way. Or she deserved what happened as in what's coming to her. Whether it's something on this physical plane like jail, or, and sticking with it being, quote, hot as hell in here, damnation. Angela revealing her relationship with her mother came up because she thanked James for his help, but says she shouldn't have received it. Now we're getting deeper into her sense of worthlessness, saying that she's not worthy of the pity because she's nothing. Not just nothing, but in the quote-unquote will you love me monologue, she's basically showing that she believes she's broken. It's also about her generalization and expectations about men due to her experiences, and how she's constantly been disappointed, hence her sarcastically saying to James, will you love me, heal me, and all the rest. The choice of words is also interesting because of Mary and James's situation, like will you heal me, but the healing part has to do with Angela's perspective of herself being these damaged goods, with her low self-esteem and feeling worthless. When she asks to get the knife back, and James says no, she believes that he's saving it for himself, hinting back at the scene with the mirror and the knife that we're the same. Also again, with nothing changing, she's dead set on killing herself. In the end, she seals her own fate as she literally walks into the fire and decides that ending her life is the only way out of her misery. Angela's story is one of a harrowing depiction of trauma, self-destruction, and hopelessness. From the abuse she receives primarily from her father, to how she'd push somebody away trying to help her, to feeling like she's worth nothing and has no hope. Her story unfortunately ends by taking her own life. If you consider the in-water ending for James to be the canon one, it seems like Silent Hill attracts people that have dealt with traumatic events and committed acts that are horrific like murder, in order to drive the person to end their own life as the only method of quote-unquote redemption. If you think James's canon ending is the leave one, then it further emphasizes how tragic her story is because she didn't really get a chance at redemption. Before I wrap up, I just wanted to provide some mental health resources in case you guys are going through something. So remember, you're not alone and there's people out there that can help you. So what do you guys think? I'd love to see what you thought about Angela's story along with the video, so feel free to leave a comment. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Until next time, see ya!